Hello, everyone. So good to see you all here. So good to be doing this today. Welcome to the STX Next live show. And my guest today is Zef Hemel. Zef, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm super excited about this. Really, I am. I'm glad we managed to, get in touch and actually get this live session going. So Zef here, my guest for today is an engineering lead right now at Mattermost, previously director of engineering at OLX, and also was it senior engineering manager at Egnyte?
Senior engineering manager at Egnyte, VP of engineering at STX Next. You may know this company.
True, yeah.
And a couple of other things. Yeah.
So how many years of experience is that in software development in general?
That depends. Like industrial, I think it's like 9 years or something like that. But I've been programming since I was 9, right? So,
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I never my first programs, let's say, never really saw a big audience.
I get that. Okay, so still tons to bring into this conversation, so I'm super glad to have you here. I have just a little bit of housekeeping to do before we start. First and foremost, if this is working correctly, you should be seeing us live on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Twitter, or I should say Periscope, but I've heard they're sunsetting it at some point later this year. And if you can see us and hear us, we would very much appreciate a comment that everything is working correctly. Say hi to Zef, and that way we can just know that this is all working the way it's intended. And we don't want to mess up neither the live stream nor the recording. If anybody asks, there is going to be a recording of this. So just let us know that everything is working correctly. Okay, so we have a lot of ground to cover here, and I hope some people are joining us here because of this little kind of clickbaity promotional material that we had out there. But before we get into all of this, cool, Justina's saying hi over on Periscope. Hello, Justina, thanks for letting us know. Before we get into all of this, I have this kind of piece. I have a pet peeve about these live streams is that they take a long time to get to the point. So I'm trying to fight against that, which is why my first question is going to be getting right to the point. And I wanted to ask you, you're an engineering lead right now, and if people are only just joining, here at the beginning, what is your number one tip for people in a similar position to yours?
So my definition of engineering lead is kind of like the first moment where generally people switch from like I'm writing code every day role to kind of more of a management role. And I think the most common thing that people tend to do is think like, hey, I'm now an engineering lead. I'm supposed to have all the answers. And basically like I have to answer all the questions. Like if people ask me something, I have to know what to tell them. And basically I'm saying like my main tip is like, don't focus on that. Your role is not to have all the answers, to know best. Your role is kind of like to facilitate and like make sure that you get the value out of the team, right? So this would be my number one tip. Like don't stick to this role of saying like I'm the most senior person in this team, so I know best. Rather kind of like try to get the value out of the team.
Okay, so there we go, watchers and listeners, some value up front, and we'll be digging much deeper into that as we go along. But okay, let's take a step back here, and let's talk a little bit about your career path, because the story behind this really is that I saw a notification on LinkedIn that you're changing jobs, and you're moving to Mattermost, and you're an engineering lead there now. So I was wondering, in your own words, how has your career kind of progressed? What decisions did you make along the way, and why did you make them?
Okay, so like, I don't want to make this super detailed and super long, but I think I already just mentioned that I started programming at 9, when I was 9, right? So my dad was a teacher at the university. He was teaching Pascal to physics students, I think. So like growing up, I had a father who was teaching programming and I was super interested in that. But he always said like, okay, when you're old enough, I will teach you programming. And then finally, when I was 9, I was deemed ready. So
Sounds like you couldn't wait to do that, right?
No, I was, yeah. So basically from the age of 9 through, well, that's primary school, at least in Holland, right? High school, and then like high school, it became super obvious, like I have to do computer science. So I did computer science. And then I did a master's in computer science and I graduated, and then I kind of like got a little bit bored. Like I was kind of not sure if I wanted to keep doing this programming for that long, so I switched back to, actually I switched back. I studied English for 1 year, English philology.
Oh,
but
really?
then also, yeah. So, and that was actually also quite interesting and completely different, right? But then kind of reality hits and kind of you're thinking, okay, so what am I going to do now? Going to be an English teacher? And then kind of like the idea from my family also came, okay, maybe you go back to computer science, and then I did a PhD. So in Holland, that's when I met my wife. My wife is Polish. She's from Koszalin, but she studied in Poznan, and she kind of at that moment moved to Holland with me, and then so we kind of needed a source of income, right? So we did a PhD. And that's after the PhD, my career really, like my industrial career really started. So I joined a startup called Cloud9 IDE, which the idea was to kind of build an integrated development environment in the browser. I worked on that for a while. And this is actually also the moment where I started to shift a little bit from just pure hacking and programming every day to like higher levels of abstraction, let's say. Like, how do you organize the work of a team? How do you do management? Because all of that I've never done before, right? I basically always worked by myself or like in a group of fellow students or something like that. So in Cloud9, I kind of transitioned more into a management role. And then from there, that kind of proceeded until I joined STX Next. There I started also as a developer again, but very quickly became kind of a step back into a lead role. Egnyte, management, senior management, OLX management, director of engineering, and now, so it's kind of like, I don't know, like swimming between like higher levels of management to like quite concrete, like engineering work. And yeah, as you mentioned, like last week, actually, I started in Mattermost as an engineering lead. So it's like another swing back and like closer to the day-to-day material, let's say.
Exactly, yeah, closer to the day-to-day material, like you said. This is something I'm really curious about, and something that came up when we were preparing for this conversation that I really wanted to follow up on. Is seems like you were a lead, you were a VP of engineering, then director, and at the peak point, I wonder how many people were you kind of responsible for? So in the organizational structure, like how many people did you have? I don't like to use the word like under you, but like were you working with directly or indirectly?
I think in OLX it was about 60, 70 people. I think technically in STX it was more about 100, because at that point, I mean, I was responsible for different offices, but this was a very different level of involvement than I had in OLX, let's say. So let's say like 70, 80 people, yeah.
Exactly. And now you're moving into engineering lead at Mattermost, and so it seems like you're going to have a bit of a smaller team to work with now, but it also seems like that's something that you wanted for yourself. So why that move? Why that change?
There's various reasons for it, but I kind of think in OLX Group, like my last position was director of engineering. So the setup then is you have a team. The team has an engineering manager. The engineering manager has sometimes a head of engineering, and the head of engineering has a director of engineering. And then above me is only CTO, right? So for me to kind of like, every level up, the level of abstraction also goes up, right? Like if you're an engineering manager, you understand what people are working on today. Like next week, we're going to finish our sprint and we're going to deliver feature A, B, and C. As head of engineering, you kind of understand the scope. Like, hey, this is the area of OLX that we're focusing on. I can kind of like still understand what all the teams are going to do. And then like every level up, it becomes more abstract. At some point, it's almost like, okay, I have 5 teams. Their setups are roughly like this. We're now planning for the budget for the next financial year. Given our roadmap, how many more people do we think we need? Like it becomes, and like, what are the metrics to kind of make sure that everything is still on track, right? So it becomes I noticed that it was hard for me to remember even like what we're delivering day to day, because it was so far from my kind of experience. And I kind of missed that. So, and Mattermost, it was an opportunity to, well, I mean, probably in OLX, I could have done something similar, but part of the reason to move to Mattermost is to work on concrete stuff again and kind of have this kind of like feedback loop of building things again. Exactly. So that's the reason to shift back.
Exactly. So this is part of what I was, thinking we could focus on today. Leading engineering teams, but maybe on this level that's a little bit, closer to the how should I say, to the actual coding, right? So I'm thinking, from your perspective, having had, the opportunity to look at various types of projects from various types of perspective. What are people doing in software engineering right now? What are these teams doing that they should stop doing?
I would say, again, I think this is also the thing we talked about, is like my big thing is reducing waste. I feel that there's a lot of cycles, like a lot of people are like time spent on things that then have like very little impact, right? We tend to focus a lot as programmers, like the discussions we like to have is like, hey, I'm using Python and it's much better than Scala, or I'm using Go, it's much better than this because I'm so much more productive. Because I don't know, like I have to write less code or something like that. Whereas then if you look at the things that we build using that and like what the impact is of what we build, it ranges completely, right? Like there's a huge number of companies that like spend years building something, and in the end, like it's just all flushed down the toilet because like, I don't know, either it was like nobody wanted to buy it or there was not enough customers. So my thing is like, how do you avoid that, right? How do you kind of like reduce the amount of like time that I'm sure having fun writing code, but actually in the end, like you have nothing to show for it because like nobody's actually using it.
Okay, so it's about reducing waste. And okay, so I think it's high time we actually get to the term that might have a lot of people joining here today. So let me ask you a question like this, Luke. So what is your response to this issue of waste, and does it connect with this idea of our 100x engineer?
Yes, it does. Okay, so before I get to 100x engineer, like it's clearly based on this concept of 10x programmer, right? I think this is like a kind of a known term, like people hear about this, it's kind of controversial. The concept of like, if you look at different programmers, some seem to be way more productive than others. Like I dug a little bit into the research on this, and I think the source of this concept is like 70 years old. Like in the 60s, somebody wrote a paper, did like academic research, kind of investigating, okay, let's give a whole group of people a programming task and see how quickly they finish it. And the results were like, I don't know, the differences between the slowest and the fastest programmer were like 20 times, the fastest was 20 times done more quickly than the other. The performance of the program was like, I don't know, 5 times different than the others, right? There were all these like kind of significant differences between the different people. And I think this is where this concept of like a 10x programmer originates, because it seems that there's such a huge gap between like the speed of programming of different people. I think there's a lot of questions you can ask about this research. Was it done properly? Is this real? Is this really useful? But this, I don't know, whether you believe it or not, 10x programmers, right? This is like a thing that exists. So
I wonder if anybody's tuning in, what's your take on the 10x programmer? Before we move on, to 100x, if you have an opinion on that, whether it's whether it's valid and some people can actually achieve 10 times more, I would love to see some of that in the comments. And we're hanging out here with Zef, obviously, but we can have a broader discussion if you join us and on social media. So go ahead and do that. And Zef, go right ahead and continue.
No, definitely interested to see what people think. Like if I look at the different companies I've worked, I've definitely seen big differences, right? Some people are very fast, some people are very slow. Usually fast also kind of comes at a cost of like, well, yes, that was written really fast and all this stuff, but is it actually understandable? Is it like, does it work in a kind of a team setup to have people that are much more extreme of what they produce? Is it actually like usable code, or is it just like a lot, right? So this is questionable. But
I'm curious about this. Sorry, if I could just dig a little bit deeper into that. So what kind of cost is that usually? If this faster programming happens, at what cost does it happen?
I think there's, well, some people can produce code very quickly. The question is if it's correct. They can say, well, oh, it only took me 2 hours and more or less works. But then if you dig into it, like there's lots of bugs and all this kind of thing. Or they produce code that technically works, and somehow, yes, there don't seem to be any bugs, but who the hell knows what is happening there? Like, it's super hard to understand. I'm sure there's also people that just do this perfectly fine. Unit test, everything, all the corner cases are checked, it's perfectly readable, and they're still fast, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is the question of like, okay, if you have a team of people where one person is like 5 times, 6 times faster than the rest, like what impact does that have on the rest of the team, right? Imagine
that's interesting.
I'm a 1x engineer sitting next to a 10x engineer, like we're both getting tasks, and this guy is like boom, boom, like, doing them one by one. Like, is that super motivating for me? Probably not, right? I'm like, well, like if I just like chill a little bit and this guy can do it, like, what am I doing here, right? So if you have these people work by themselves, maybe it's fine. In a team setup, it's probably problematic to have this type of people integrated into the team.
Okay. So I see. So that was a bit of a sidetrack. Let's then move right on, because I think we were getting to we know what the 10x engineer is now. So what about 100x? What's the difference?
Well, it's a 10x difference. So
oh yeah, sorry, math.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one obvious. So where this came from is we had this at some point. I think I was at Egnyte. We were preparing like an event, and we were looking for kind of like what are some talks we can give. And I had this idea because like what happened, I think like a few weeks before, is we just finished the project. One engineer for 3 months, I think, worked on one task, like not full time, not all the time, right? But it kind of like meandered and meandered. And finally, after 3 months, he finished the feature. And this was presented by the product manager in a demo, kind of like, okay, so this feature is done, this is how it works. And then afterwards, this engineer came to me, is like, I had no idea that this is what it was used for. Like, if I knew this was the goal, I could have hacked something together in 3 days. This concept kind of stuck with me. Is like, how is it possible that, I mean, he did the Jira ticket according to spec, right? He did exactly what I was asked, but not fully understanding, internalizing like what the purpose was of this. And like with his kind of engineering mindset, but also understanding what is easy, what is hard, what will take a lot of time. He kind of just said, okay, no, I'm just going to do what is here. I'm not going to think about what are we trying to achieve. But if he would have done that, like probably he would have finished in a couple of days. And I'm thinking like, okay, there's something there, because this is no longer about how fast you program. It's about what you actually build, right? And why and how and all this type of thing. So I thought like there's something there. This kind of feels like a thing that has potential to have much more impact than just faster programming. So let's pitch this as the 100x engineer. Yet the other level, right? Where you basically don't focus on how quickly do you write code, how much code can you crank out in an hour, but really think of like how can we be smart about this? What are the processes around this? Do we, of all this giant project, do we have to do all of it? Do we know that this will actually achieve the results that we are looking for? So kind of like really pulling engineers all the way into product thinking, business thinking, like fully understanding of what are we trying to do, and is this a good way to kind of achieve that?
Okay, so I'm curious, because it seems to be first and foremost about communication, maybe not first and foremost, but it seems to be about mindset. And it seems to be about the kinds of questions that this engineer who's highly productive asks themselves. So can you say a little bit about that mindset and what's kind of the mode of thinking when you're a 100x engineer?
Yeah, so like for me, the opposite of a 100x engineer is kind of, and I think this is also what you use in your titles, right? Like the ticket machine, right? This is like a super not nice term, but like basically, I'm a programmer. Give me a Jira ticket, Jira ticket in, code out, right?
Yeah.
Just give me a spec. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? I'll write the code. I don't think about anything else. And I mean, there's a place that's useful, right? I'm not saying this is like a bad way of working, and there's a place for that. And for some people, this is just what they want to do. But if you extend the scope where you say, okay, I'm not focusing on the Jira ticket, but I'm looking at what like the business requirements. So I'm trying to understand like what is the customer problem. Do I agree that this do I understand well, first of all, do I understand the customer? Do I understand what they need? Then probably there's product management that thinks, okay, we identified these problems. We think these are going to be solutions for them. Do I, as an engineer, do I understand that these are indeed solutions? Do I agree these are good solutions? Or do I have alternative solutions? Do I have ideas of like kind of how I can tweak these solutions so that they're way simpler to implement? Or do I kind of like, I'm kind of not confident at all that this is going to work, because like honestly, like product management people make mistakes or they can be wrong, and this is also I think what we see a lot. How can we test? How can we make sure that what we think is going to work is actually going to work?
I see. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. No,
I was just. I get that moment at least once every live stream. You know, there's a bit of a delay, and then we're like, "You go ahead. You go ahead." Anyway, we do have a bit of a case to look at a little bit later on. That's a bit of a spoiler for you watchers and listeners. But first, we've got a comment coming in from Wojciech Dikota, who was actually our guest on a previous live stream in December. Yeah, hi Wojciech, it's very nice of you to join us today. And he is saying, hi Zef, nice to see you again. We covered that bit. What about burnout? Does a programmer who has 10x or 100x the impact, I assume, get tired faster, or are they burned out and quit the company sooner? So I wonder what you would say to that.
I don't think this really has to do with burning out faster. It's the type of, like, honestly, let's not spend too much time on this 10x thing. I think this is more of a talent thing. Like some people are just like somehow programming talents and they're just super fast. And I don't know if they burn out faster or not. Honestly, I don't know. 100x for me is more about like the type of work that you do. It's not about doing more work. It's more about like a different type of work, right? Rather than just like blindly typing the code, you first think about like, hey, what do I need to do? I don't think it will really like affect burnout or energy drain. It's just it's a different type of work.
Yeah, and it seems like there's somebody in the comments who agrees with you, because Maciej Urbański just messaged this. I bet you that a 100x engineer will burn out slower than a ticket machine. It's catching on, see? Just because 100x will do work that actually makes sense. I feel like that's a valid point here, right?
Yeah, no, this is like, yeah, so maybe this is the moment where we already transitioned to kind of my kind of project that I started when I was in OLX, because because it's going to be relevant.
Yeah, let's show an example then. Let's talk about this example of a case of 100x engineering. What can you say about that?
Yeah, so like 100x engineer, like great concept, kind of like a hyperbolic idea, but like it's more about like how do you kind of like optimize like your time spent, right? So when I joined OLX, I don't know, like, so very brief introduction for OLX and OLX Group for the people that don't know what this company does, right? So OLX Group is a classifieds. Yeah. OLX Group is like runs a bunch of classified sites across the world. If you're in Poland, you definitely know OLX. Like it's kind of the Craigslist. In the US, it's called Craigslist, right? Of Poland. Like everybody knows this. Automoto, Autodom, OLX. That's all run by OLX Group, right? But what's less known, and especially in our circles, let's say, is that actually OLX is also the largest job site in Poland. There's competition, but in terms of like blue collar market, so like the more like the drivers, that type of job, actually OLX is the biggest one in Poland. And at that time when I joined, so this was pre-pandemic, the problem was that it was actually there was way more demand for skilled workers than there were actual skilled workers. So there were not enough candidates to kind of apply for the job. So the thinking was like, how do we kind of get people that are not actively looking for a job to apply for them? And the concept that they came up with internally is best described as Tinder for jobs. So the idea is you have an app or a website or something like that. You create like a super basic profile. And rather than you actively looking for jobs, it kind of like pushes job recommendations to you, and you conceptually swipe left or right. And mostly I never used Tinder, of course, but like if I like it, I don't like it. And then based on those swipes, let's say, it would recommend you different types of things. And, you know, if I like a job and then the employer likes me back, then we can connect, and hopefully that leads to an application, right? That was the concept.
Was there an equivalent of a super like there? Because on Tinder, I think
honestly, you would have to explain what is a super like.
Oh gosh, oh well, I haven't used it myself, but I feel like it's like a paid feature where you can message somebody regardless of how they swipe on you. Okay. Or maybe it's not that. You know what? We should move on because I don't know enough about Tinder to continue this.
We'll all pretend we never used Tinder. Anyway, so that was the concept. But we didn't build this. Like, this was the concept, and then it felt like, hey, that's a cool idea. That should work, right? So now there's different ways. There's different things you can do. You can say, okay, let's hire a team. Let's spend a year and a half, whatever, right, to build the front end for this, the mobile application for this, the back end, the machine learning models, the recommendation engine, the brand, the landing pages, the marketing campaigns. Like, let's do all of that. And honestly, like, OLX Group has some money, right? They could do that. They could say, hey, let's hire a group of 10, 15, 20 people. Let's spend an hour, like an hour, year and a half, 2 years on this, and fingers crossed, right?
Right, and from the idea to the execution, almost 2 years pass, right? And only then do you find out whether it actually catches on.
Exactly. So this is the risk, right? So that's approach number one. The other approach, and that's the approach that we kind of went with, is based on lean startup. I don't know. I'm like the guy that there's a book called Lean Startup. Yeah. And the idea there is the observation this guy makes is like, hey, like the vast majority of startups fail, right? 90%, 80%, they fail. And why do they fail? Because they basically go in to like the product this way. We have a great idea. We're convinced we're going to create like an amazing slide deck, some mock-ups. We're going to get VC funding, get some millions of whatever dollars. We're going to burn that money, or use that money and build an amazing product and then go to market. And then it turns out like nobody wants it, right? This happens all the time. So
yeah, we're going to do all of that, go to the market, and then hope for the best. Yeah, is basically the last step there. Yeah.
Yeah. So what this guy, Eric Ries, I think is his name, says, no, what you should do is not focus on learning. You should do validated learning. The idea is that you have a bunch of hypotheses, so assumptions, right? And rather than like building a product where in the end you kind of hope for the best, you're going to figure out like, how can I as quickly as possible validate this hypothesis? So for instance, right, to use this example of the Tinder for job example that I gave. One of the assumptions there is that passive job seekers, so people that are not actively looking for a job, would create a profile and actually go to a page like this, right? Which is a huge assumption because, you know, if I'm not looking for a job, like, am I actually going to interact with something like this? Am I going to make any efforts to have employers find me?
Right, yeah. And again, if this assumption is false, then...
Exactly. The whole thing becomes pointless. Like, you build an amazing app that I'm sure is super flashy and works well, but, you know, nobody's going to use that, right? So how do you know? How do you find out if this is true? So one thing you can do is you can interview some people. So we did that, right? So we interviewed people in this audience and asked them like, hey, do you want to do that? But like, still, would you do that? It's kind of a hypothetical case because it's like, well, you invite them to the office, you ask them a question, and are you going to get the real answer?
Sure,
Don't
right.
really
Yeah,
know, right?
Yeah, I think there's like a bias. I read about a study that, you know, once you get somebody actually in front of you, once you start asking these questions, they kind of want to give you the answer that they think you expect. They want to kind of please you with their answers.
I mean, you're paying them, right? You're paying them to come to the office and answer your questions. Like, it's not going to be real. And of course, you're going to invite 5 people, not 1,000, right? So even if 1 out of those 5 is going to say yes, it doesn't mean that 20% of the market is going to use your product, right? So what we did instead is a concept that I think you also liked, what I dubbed pop-up driven development. So we designed an experiment where we kind of pre-selected, I don't even know how, like, let's say 50,000 OLX users. So this is where we kind of leverage OLX.pl, right? We get a shit ton of traffic, like lots of people there. Some are visiting the jobs category, some don't, right? So we pre-select a whole bunch of people where honestly we don't know that much about them. And what we're going to do is we're going to, like, on a certain day, whenever they enter OLX, we're going to push a pop-up in their face saying like, hey, we are about to, or we have launched a new feature that is kind of trying to, we kind of explain very like in 2 sentences, like, no, actually, it was a different pop-up. It was, we had a bunch of pop-ups. But the first one was basically like, hey, we would like to know a little bit more about you. How would you describe yourself? Are you actively looking for a job? Are you kind of like, I have a job and I'm not interested in anything else? Are you kind of in a category of like, I'm not actively looking for a job, but you know, if the right thing comes along, I'm interested. Like, this is the category that we care about, right? And the fourth one is like, I don't have a job and I never want to work. Like, get out of my face.
I was just born into wealth, so this is irrelevant for me. I'm just browsing
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we launched this pop-up. So people selected what they did, and then if you selected, okay, like, hey, I'm actively looking, or I'm like, I'm not actively looking, but the right offer comes along, sure. It's like, oh, cool. Like for you, we just launched this new product. Click here for more information. You clicked on that, you jump to a landing page where we basically lay out this concept of this Tinder for jobs, right? All of this is, I mean, there's no actual product here. Okay, now let me just describe the flow, and then I understand how we build it. So there's a landing page. It has a button that kind of has nice screenshots of like, this is the application, and a sign up button. So you click the sign up button, you're asked to fill in a very basic profile. Like, what is your name, phone number, what is your current job, how many years of experience do you have? Great profile, right? So, something basic like that. Then and then it's like, okay, cool, thank you. And like the thing disappears, you go back to OLX, right? After a few days, you get an email, or you get a pop-up again when you go to OLX. It's like, hey, based on your profile, we actually found a whole bunch of like interested employers for you. Would you like to know more about them? But it was very specific, like blah 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 in this company is actually very interested in your profile. Would you like to learn more? You click yes. You jump into this application and you see this view, right? This is the job. It's a good match, whatever, 80% match with your profile, like, dislike.
Okay, so that's what's happening on the front end from the user's perspective.
Yes. So, but we implemented that in a matter of weeks. The way we did that is like, well, pop-ups, building a pop-up is not super hard, right? If you just create a little bit of like HTML and things like that. The landing page, you just have to make it look nice. The sign-up form was basically, I mean, conceptually, it was like a Google form that looked a little bit nicer, right? It basically, all the data that people filled into this would go into a Google Sheet, and like nothing else. Like in terms of logic, there was nothing. It was just like nice looking, and of course a lot of tracking, right? We tracked like how many people that get the pop-up close it, how many of the people that get the pop-up selected like I'm a passive seeker, how many people then went to the landing page. Of the people that went to the landing page, how many people pushed the sign up button? Of the people that went to the sign up, pushed the sign up button, how many filled in the whole form?
So you're basically tracking conversion every step of the way.
Yes, and actually already at that point, we can answer a bunch of our questions, right? Like, first of all, like, how do we reach our audience? Like, can we reach our audience through pop-ups? Because like maybe if everybody closes it, there's no point. Also, how many people are interested enough to sign up for it, even though we built nothing? Like we just created a form that feeds data into a spreadsheet. So then you're going to get a sense of like, is there something there, or is this a complete waste of time? At that stage, it could have been, after 3 weeks in, it could have been that we said, okay, this is just a cool idea, it just doesn't work. So then the question is like, what's the impact of that, right? Like finding out after a few weeks that this is a complete bogus idea, whereas you could have spent a year building something that nobody would have used. Like, no.
Yeah. So if you can spend 3 weeks to then save the team like a year and a half, and multiple people on the team, a year and a half of work,
exactly,
that is already like magnitudes, I think, beyond even a
so
100
this
times
is like
impact.
you get to 100x very quickly this way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then the way we implement it, so then it proceeds, right? Because so as I said, like basically this fed into a spreadsheet. Then what my team did is we manually looked for jobs for these people. So I mean, this experiment was running for like an hour or two. We collected like 50, 60 people that kind of went through the whole flow, and then my team like manually found jobs for these people. So they just looked at every row and every profile. They went on OLX and they searched for it and they copied and pasted, job recommendations manually into a spreadsheet. And then we basically built a super simple front end that looked nice on top of the resulting spreadsheet that we created ourselves. So there's no machine learning, no recommendation engine. Like this was like hand. That's also why it took 2 days, right? Because we were busy manually looking for those job.
Yeah, that's why you get the email after 2 days and not after 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, but that allowed us to test. First of all, do people actually also they created a profile? Do they actually get back to this app? Do they understand what's happening there? Do they interact with it? So again, like you're validating more parts of this concept of like, hey, is this actually going to work, right? In our case, it all kind of checked out. Like everything looked very promising, and in the end, we kind of said, okay, we know enough now. So after like a couple of months of running these types of experiments, because we ran this on the candidate side, but there's also an employer side. Like the employer also has to understand, like, hey, liking, disliking candidates is kind of confusing. So you want to kind of check if this works as well. So we ran all kinds of experiments, but yeah, basically to validate, like, hey, does any of this make sense? Because if not, like, we can do other stuff, right? Like, it's not like we have nothing to do. So yeah, which I think is like an interesting way of working that many companies are doing this now, but a lot of other companies are super confident that they have the best idea ever, and they just decide to go all in, right?
Yeah, so it's all about, it seems, validating those assumptions. And I wonder, it seems this approach, I mean, some people might be, familiar with the lean startup approach, but first of all, one way it's interesting is that like it's within a larger organization, right? So it's not strictly a startup environment. And one other thing that I'm curious about is, okay, circling back to the idea of of being an engineering lead, because somebody listening to this could apply this framework to their own projects. But now, how do you lead others to take on this kind of thinking?
Yeah, so and this is also why I wanted to jump to this example, because the question is like, hey, the question is what motivates people? Do you feel as an engineer productive when you just squeeze out a lot of code? Or do you feel productive or like fulfilled, happy, whatever, however you want to phrase it, when you have something that people are actually using, right? And that's also because like effectively for, let's say, 3-4 months, what me and my team did is build fake landing pages, pop-ups, like the most basic, like backend things that are basically serving up static thing. Like it's technologically, it was completely uninteresting, right? There was no technical challenge here at all. But the team was super motivated because it was clear, like we're testing, like we don't really care if we're writing this in Python or Node or whatever. Like we want to know, like that we believe in this idea. We want to make sure that this actually works, right? So it was for them, like the team was super motivated to work this way. So in terms of like energy, I think the energy level was very high. How do you instill this mindset? I think you kind of have to, well, first of all, like this cannot just be, you kind of have to have buy-in of this way of working in the company, right? At least at some level. Like, this is a super close collaboration with product, with the business side, but also like you have to tell the people in the team, like, this is what we're going to do. If you expect to build super advanced machine learning models, we may get to that at some point, but chances are well, either like this idea doesn't work at all. It may also turn out that we don't need advanced machine learning models. We can just do like basic matching with a for loop or whatever, right? Like ultimately it's about like solving the customer problem. Are you on board with that, right? So you're also kind of pre-selecting people to kind of care about that and not just about like the for loops that are going to write tomorrow. So
sounds like it would be interesting material for for some good interview questions too, right? To try and select those people that have this mindset.
Yeah. No, and that's also like a big filter for us when we interviewed in OLX, and then now I guess it will be the same in Mattermost. Is like I ask like, hey, how often have you challenged like product requirements? Like, do you just take them, or do you kind of try to understand what's behind them? And if there's other ways, like, do you have an example of how you propose achieving the same result, or like even like, can we test this in a simpler like? And many people will not have done that because it's not that common, but at least you can kind of tell like, hey, like, oh, like that's interesting. Like I'm at least intrigued enough to kind of learn about that stuff as well.
Okay. So in a sense, you're kind of looking for those engineers that like to rebel a little bit, that like to kind of question and ask, why are we doing this? And quite often, I imagine.
Yeah.
I wonder.
Because I see that you see this everywhere, right? Like now I imagine there's this whole new product, but the products in a sense are just like big features, right? So like because you mentioned, yes, this is happening in the context of larger OLX. And it was kind of launched. Ultimately, it was launched as a completely different brand. Ultimately, that's a long story. You merge it back into the main product that exists today. Parts of it exist today, but every time you kind of think about like a new feature to add, you have to wonder like, am I now going to spend like 3 months, a month on something that is going to be actually solving the problem that we want to solve? And how do we, as early as possible, validate if that's going to be the case? Because otherwise, like every feature developed, even though if you have lots of money and you're fine with wasting a month, like that feature is going to be there. And either you kill it and you remove it, which is super rare, or you have to maintain it forever, right? And also, like in OLX, we saw this. Like if you're following OLX a little bit, at some point, you may have seen that we rebranded all of OLX, right? This is a massive project, right? It took us a year to do rebranding, because also we had to rebrand all the features that very few people use that we kind of launched at some point, never took out, but now they had to keep working, right? So there's a cost to. Even though your company survives, like a startup dies, features in a larger product live forever unless you actively like get rid of them, right? So there's a huge cost of kind of like dragging this product debt, as it's called, kind of like along, right? So
it really makes you take inventory of what's there. Rebranding, I sometimes think, if we were to rebrand at some point, what would we find basically? Where's that STX Next logo right now, displayed that, we would be even surprised to find it there. So that's definitely, it makes you take inventory. I keep thinking back, okay, so I really like what you said about, product is just like a big feature, because I was going to ask you a question of like, how do you apply this to projects in flight? And so how would you imagine this flow? How would you reimagine this flow if you could? Let's say there's a stakeholder, for example, and they might think of a feature that they want to add. So how do you apply this mindset instead of saying just sir, yes sir, this ticket will be done? What kind of questions do you ask then to get that kind of information to validate that and to find and check these assumptions, I suppose?
Okay, so I think to start, the question has to be. I mean, let's ignore the specific feature. What is the goal? What problem are we trying to solve, right? If there's like a can we put a metric on that? Let's say, can we, I'm thinking what would be a good example here. One of the things that I always keep using, and that's a smaller thing. So one of the observations we had at some point in OLX is that there were a significant number of users that would get 0 results when they search for something. And of course, if you type in something and you hit enter and you get 0 results, you leave. Because you didn't find it. So the question is like, how do we resolve? Let's say that, I don't know, I don't remember the numbers. It doesn't really matter. 5%, whatever. 2% of users that type in something end up with 0 results and they leave. We want to reduce that. So then the high level goal is like, we want to reduce this from 2% to 1%. Now you may say, okay, so the new feature we want to have or the new tweak we want to have is that we want to give them results anyway, whatever. Like maybe we've widened the filters, maybe we spell correct, like do whatever to give them results, because then there's a chance they will stick around, right? That's the high level goal. There's different ways you can think of implementing that. You can say, okay, hey, we want to do spell checking. Like we are going to autocorrect spelling because we see that a lot of people are misspelling words. That's an assumption that that's going to help. And that's something you can probably validate, right? Quite quickly, because for instance, like we have all the search phrases that people used. We can autocorrect them. We can check if they would result in results now. So that's kind of an easy one. But you can also say, well, you know, and then also engineers can say, yeah, but you know, we have all these filters. What about if we drop random ones? Like we pick a filter, whatever they selected, like, hey, I only want things in Poznan in 5 kilometers, but we're just going to increase this to 10 and see, like rerun the search and see if we get the results then, and kind of like, and that's another thing you can try and see if it works and so on, right?
Right. But then it starts, then it's a different conversation, right? Because instead of having a ticket like build this feature, it's more about thinking in terms of you're getting a goal and you're getting, like you said, maybe a metric associated with that, and then so it's
like my push also, like, and this is also where we kind of like moved in OLX, is like no longer the way we kind of work, and many companies work this way, is like every quarter we say, what is our future roadmap, right? What are we going to try to achieve this quarter? That used to be a feature list, like we are going to launch feature A, B, and C. What we kind of ended up with, and where I think it's a healthy thing to move, is not focus on feature lists, but focus on like end results, right? And then there may be initiatives or ideas of features to build to achieve that result. But it may also turn out, and hopefully you can check this early, that after 2 weeks, well, you know, you committed for the quarter, kind of like, hey, probably we're going to build this feature, but after 2 weeks you figure out it doesn't make any sense. But you can come up with another feature that would move the needle on this kind of goal, right?
So and on the other hand, what do you do? Sorry. Because on the other hand, what do you do if there's a feature, you know, planned for this quarter and you validate it and it turns out it doesn't even make sense to build it? Do you then cancel that feature from the list, you know, with the old way of thinking, right?
I mean, and sometimes, like, and I've seen this, like teams build those features because it's on the list, whether even though they already feel like it's probably not going to work, but you know, like we already committed to that, we kind of want to achieve our goals, so let's do it anyway. So what you have to do is like not have feature lists as goals, but business impact as goals, right? And then also like you kind of shift, like I wrote this other thing called like no more requirements, where you know, you really like gear the whole team towards like business of objectives, not checklists, not like very specific requirements, to really push like, hey, think about with an open mind of like how to achieve this thing. And of course, there's always going to be concrete ideas of how to tackle that, but I think everybody has to be open to the idea that half of them may not work at all.
Yeah, I wonder. So when you give, you know, when you make this transition, when you give these teams business requirements instead of these technical specs, does it ever get met with resistance, for example? Do you ever get feedback like, just tell me what to build because I just want to get my ticket? Or how does that usually play out?
Some people are more interested in this than others, for sure.
Okay.
Some are kind of like waiting, kind of sitting back. I mean, that usually, hopefully you have some people in the team that are like, oh yeah, we can do this, we can do that. And others are kind of like, okay, I'll just wait this discussion out. Ultimately, it will result in the tickets, and I'll do the tickets, right? I mean, it's fine to have kind of a balance of like people that are more like engaged on the product side, and some people that are more focused on the execution. I think that's okay, but you need to have, if you want to keep a couple of people that are kind of engaged on the product side, like, to work this way. But you don't have to have the whole team thinking this way.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was thinking about, because this seems to be a little bit of a different type of work. It's more, you know, creative. It's more about finding a way. And I suppose my question would be: is there still place in your ideal team for both, for example, 100x engineers that think more in terms of, I'm a product engineer, I'm thinking how to build that product, how to get to that metric? Is there space for both this and the people who are more focused on actually delivering on the engineering side, and actually you make the decision what we're going to build, and I'm going to think about the how?
Yeah, I would say definitely yes. Yeah, I think you probably need both in the team, because some people are just not like, hypothetically, you get a person that is just as interested in like, how do you structure the architecture in such a way that it's extensible, blah, 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 blah. But also like, how do I build the most useful product? Like, it's theoretically it's possible that you find people that care about everything end to end in all possible dimensions. Realistically, you're probably going to find people that are either like more geared towards like, how do I organize my classes, my architecture, my services, all this type of thing. And there's people that are more geared towards like the other side. And if you put them together and like somehow make that work, and I guess make that work is the engineering part. Then it's good to have both, right?
Okay, so a balance and a mix is possible here. Great. Okay. This has been planned for an hour, so we have just 10 minutes to go. Now would be a great time for everybody watching to ask your questions about this sort of approach. I just wanted to bring one thing to everybody's attention. Grzegorz on YouTube said hello. Hello back to you, Grzegorz.
Very insightful, thank you, Grzegorz.
I just want to make sure that the people who do take the time, that they get a response from us.
Yeah, no,
yeah, sorry that it took us 20 minutes to get here, but the conversation was riveting. Okay, so finally, I would like to give the watchers and listeners some actionable steps here, right? So let's say they're in a typical kind of situation, projects in flight. Maybe they have a Jira board with tickets on it, and maybe the tickets are more about build this, build that. If you're leading a team, what steps do you take to start making this transition, this transformation happen? Because I'm wondering, does it start with a conversation? Is it something that you just bring up with the stakeholders, or like your direct superior that you should be doing this?
No, I'm kind of thinking, what is the good moment to start this, right? Because if you're mid-sprint and like tickets are in progress, this is not the moment where you start to rethink everything. Probably you can like a good moment to kind of like play with this is like what is it called? Like, I think grooming session is no longer politically correct or whatever, but like refinement, right? Where you kind of like think, okay, we have new requirements, let's turn them into tickets, right? This is the moment where you start to ask a lot of questions. Okay, these are the requirements. Explain who, like, if it's not clear, because it really depends how you get those requirements, right? Who's the persona? Who is going to use this? Like, just ask honestly, why, how, what? Like, asking lots of questions, trying to dig into until you, as an engineering lead or engineer, like fully understand and also buy in, like mentally understand. Like, yes, I would do the same. Like, I now understand, and I think this is going to be successful. Or, and this is also like I've seen this happen. It's like, okay, looking, especially now, I fully understand what we're trying to do and why. What about the priorities? What about the order? Like, do I also, like, can we say, well, this part that seems like a clear win, maybe we do that first, this and less thing. And you can ask, okay, this is going to be let's say this is going to be a huge epic. It's going to take us like a month. Could we think of a version of this that we cut down and can do in a week, and then see if that works, right? Can we cut this down into a smaller? I mean, this is like, we're almost getting back to regular Scrum things. Like, and this is, of course, like, it's all connected, right? Like, can we cut this down to an MVP? Not just but yeah, to validate this, right? To see if this is actually going to work, not just to,
basically, so maybe get back to people should start asking. Maybe people should start asking, can we turn this into a pop-up, right? Can we do a pop-up first? Ask if people are interested, right?
honestly, like pop-ups are extremely annoying. So like in that sense, like I use this as a pop-up driven development. Like, yeah, it kind of works for us, but if you're going to like, oh my God, the web is practically unusable because of all the pop-ups these days. So I wouldn't recommend it in general, but it works for us.
Yeah, but it stands for some sort of user research that you can do, using the resources that you have rather quickly, just to validate whether this 1 month epic even makes sense.
And it can be also a button, right? It's like, hey, it doesn't have to be like completely blocking. It can be, I mean, and we've done this too, where you kind of claim, you can run an experiment. So let's say, again, we don't have much time, but a very quick example, right? So let's say you have an e-commerce site and you have different ways of paying for something. And you notice that at the pay page, like a lot of people are dropping off. And you're wondering like, hey, what if I add whatever, Apple Pay to this? Would that help? What you can do is you can put an Apple Pay logo on there, make it selectable. And then when people select it, say, hey, coming soon or something like that. But you track if people select it.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you data on like, okay, should we now invest a week, 2 weeks trying to integrate Apple Pay or not? Because if nobody pushed it, like you can just kind of like pretend that something's there and then basically, sorry, coming soon, just checking, right? You have to be nice about it, but it's not as intrusive as like a pop-up in your face, let's say, to kind of like very quickly check like these ideas, right?
So the pop-up doesn't have to be a pop-up, but just something for the users to interact with so they can give you some initial data, how interested they are.
Ultimately, it's just a technique. The core is like, how do you check if your assumption is right? However you can achieve that best, like the quickest is the way to go without offending people. Because again, like it can be kind of like violent, let's say, to customers if you're constantly checking things and they never can use your regular site because there's just stuff going on all the time.
Exactly. All right, so like you mentioned, we don't have a lot of time left, and I don't want to keep you past the time box that we have. So, well, some final thoughts then on this. First of all, I'm going to start with thanking you just for your time, obviously. I'm super glad we could do this. Before we say goodbye, is there anything in particular that you want to, direct people to? I know you have a Twitter, or, where can people find you, follow you, read more?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. A lot of these ideas are also on my website, zef.me. And Zef is a Dutch name, but it's very uncommon. So I managed to that's why I jump on every new service as soon as possible, so I can get Zef. So I have Zef on Twitter. I have Zef.me as a website. So yeah, Zef.me website. There's a bunch of this stuff around these topics there. Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sure there will be links. So.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I envy you that you have this Twitter handle. I think it's just @Zef, right? That's all.
Yep. Sometimes people offer me to buy it.
Seriously?
Yeah. There's a whole story about what Zef means in South Africa, but we don't have time for that. Google Zef culture, and you'll find that this is like a whole thing in itself.
Yeah. Some people might have heard of the Antwoord, I think, and
yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is what I mean. Yeah.
And they played a concert here in Boston. I regret not having attended that, but they did play here. I heard it was pretty legendary.
Okay.
Anyway, okay. Any other announcements for our audience, or anything else you want to share?
No, I don't think so. Not at this stage, no.
All right, cool. If you're watching this and you're not following STX Next yet, and you want to see our next live stream where I'll be talking with more engineering leads, engineering managers, CTOs, just go ahead and give us a follow on LinkedIn. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter too. Our handle is a little bit longer, but it's @STX Next, so you can do that. And Zef, I would love to continue this conversation sometime. I feel like we just got started here, and there's a lot more.
We can do this again, like next week. You have time?
I think that sounds good. No,
all right, see you next Thursday.
We want to have a bit of a cadence with this. I actually have some exciting guests in the pipeline that I can't talk about yet.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so maybe not next week, but let's maybe see if we can do something again, at least this year, just to dig deeper into this, because this was a great conversation. You're just starting at Mattermost. I would love to hear more about that story as it unfolds, So I don't think it's the last time we'll be seeing you on the STX Next live show.
All right, cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again, Zef, and thank you all watchers and listeners for joining us today. That'll be all from us for today. Keep the conversation going. If you want to leave some comments on LinkedIn, for example, then Zef's there. If you want to tweet at him and ask him additional follow-up questions, Zef's there too. So just find Zef, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
All right, thanks again. I'm going to click the button to end the broadcast now.